I'm back to give you an update this week on the health crisis that we're sitting in. I spoke last week talking about how the virus affects us, how we get infected by the virus, the importance of social distancing, the opportunity to help prevent ourselves from, or at least the opportunity to boost our immune system in anticipation of being exposed to this virus. And this week I'm going to talk more just about numbers and perspective and where that puts us and where we are today. So the three things I'm going to talk about today in this health crisis update is number one, numbers game. I just want to go over the numbers because we see numbers thrown all over, and sometimes that puts us in a different mindset. And I think it's really important for us to be conscious of what we're looking at and make a decision of what type of information we're going to pay attention to and actually what kind of information we should focus in on. So the numbers I'm going to talk about mindset and how looking at certain numbers affects our mindset, and so we can be proactive about what types of information to focus in on. And last but not least, we'll talk about, after we know all that information, what does that mean for us? What's our new job in this new health crisis? What's really important for us and our families as we get through this long haul of this journey of learning a whole new way of life. So getting started, again, I'm Dr. Angie Martinez. I have my own private clinic called Root Cause Medicine. I'm still open seeing patients virtually now, especially a lot of patients wanting to know about immune health. So I'm open for those services, but I'm here to present this information initially for my patients, because I try and keep my patients in the loop. So if you become a patient of mine, I keep you in the loop with a lot of information and a personalized newsletter that goes to you. So I get this ready for my newsletter, but I'm happy to share it with anybody on social media. There's my website up there, drangiemartinez.com. That's just drangiemartinez.com if you want more information. But let's get started. So numbers game. It doesn't matter. You're going to turn on the TV. You're going to open up your internet or whatever news feed you have coming in on your phone, and you're just going to see numbers. Today's number was over 5,000 people have died. And so what do these numbers really mean? So let's put this in perspective. So first of all, there are over 3 million people in the U.S., 3 million in the U.S. And I symbolize that by this big square. That's all of us in the U.S. And so whenever you're looking at numbers, I don't know if you remember math, you actually have to look at perspective of that number. What is 5,000? 5,000 what? What's 5,000 of who? What population are you evaluating where we get 5,000 deaths? And that's what we call a denominator, is the total population. And so in math, you have to understand what that denominator is. And I'm going to explain to you how that sort of screws things up. We can't really tell what the heck is going on with this pandemic that we're in. So first of all, in the 3 million, the total of us, 3 million in the U.S., of the 3 million, right now we know that there are a little over 240,000 cases that are positive by a test. And so we have the test that's quantifying who our denominator a group of patients are. So that really represents a small portion of the 3 million. So we know that there's, of these 240,000 people that have been tested, there's 5,000 of that group that have died and passed away. So we don't know how many positives of those of us walking out who don't go into the hospital, who don't have big complex symptoms. We don't know that rate of how many positive cases, and there's a lot of guessing about how many people are truly positive. But the problem is that we don't know that because we don't test. That's been one of the arguments that's been a problem, that we just have not tested enough to get that denominator correctly. And when we don't have that denominator, then we can't have a rate. We can't project in the future really what is going on because we didn't test healthy people. We're not testing people out here. We're just testing sick people. And so when you're just testing sick people, now your numbers fall in tighter, and then all of a sudden those death rates and those mortality rates look really skewed, because it looks horrible when you're thinking 5,000 people are dying. That's never a good thing when you have that many people dying, but we have such a small group of people that we're testing that against. The other flip side is this is all you see in the news. And we can't really do anything about figuring out what that means for the rest of us. And for now, at least the projections of what numbers they've used, numbers that they've used from China and South Korea and Italy, they've tried to use some of those numbers to project what that means for the US. And really, there's big ranges. They say of the rest of us, or at least if you just think of us as a total population, 40 to 70% of us will probably have been infected with this virus in the near future, if not already infected with this virus. So that's a big chunk that's a large portion of people in the US. But even of the large amount of those of us that are going to be infected with this virus, 80% of us are actually going to be fine. We're not going to have any symptoms. If anything, they might be mild. We'll probably stay home. We won't be tested, and we'll get over it. We don't ever see this in the news as being an important number, but that's really important to focus in on because that's important for us as we're starting to plan our lives in the near future, is that most of the time it's going to be fine. The 20% that's left are the ones that then end up being more complex cases. So those 20% do end up hospitalized. And of those 20%, they might be even more complicated in that they might need a ventilator. And of those, maybe 1% die. Those numbers are still high. I don't want to downplay that. And that's unfortunately what we hear and know about. And that's what we focus in on. But my point about this is from a numbers perspective, there's still 80% of us that are going to be okay. And then of the 240,000 cases that are positive, there's still over 200,000 that recover. And so we don't see that either. And here's the problem, is that if we sit in the news on a day-to-day basis and we're just seeing these numbers day in and day out and focusing in on these numbers and not realizing there's people who've recovered and not realizing the majority of us probably will do okay, when we sit in that, then all of a sudden it changes our mindset. Our brain actually changes in that setting. What happens is we sit caught up in this part of our brain called the midbrain. And in that midbrain, that's the part of our brain that actually sets us in a state of survival. And so in that state of survival, what happens is we stop thinking clearly. We mostly react. And when we react, it's very emotional, sometimes not very thoughtful, and not a good place to be in terms of good health. When we sit in the survival mode, it actually affects our immune system too. So it actually can set us up from a health standpoint and put us at risk for infections. And that's not the place we want to be at this time. So that's the problem of sitting with these types of numbers and paying attention to these types of numbers and not realizing this other part where 80% and and the majority of the people that we've covered, when we could see these numbers, this is when we sit in our prefrontal cortex. That's the part of our brain. It's a different part of our brain. So this is the midbrain. Our midbrain processes this, but if we can get out of that and sit in our prefrontal cortex, then we can process this information. And this information actually helps us get rational. We can actually all of a sudden step back and look at it from a perspective standpoint. We can realize this is scary, but we don't have to lose it. We don't have to get traumatized. We don't have to get stuck in this feeling of survival. If we can actually step out of that and get in our prefrontal cortex, the different part of our brain, so we can be a little bit more rational. And the reason why we want to get into that part of our brain, number one, is it's a healthier place to be. When we're rational, now we can plan. Now we can focus in on being healthy. Now we can actually be proactive and take this information and decide, now I need to do something different. That's what this is all about. Now I need to do something different about my health. Now I need to teach my children something different. Now I need to continue to social distance myself because I realize now that's probably not good for the people in my life who might be at risk of an infection, because now you can rationalize it a little bit better. But I just wanted to point it out that numbers really set us up in our brain differently. And social media likes these numbers, because then you click on that all the time, and that's what social media wants. And so when you get stuck in those numbers, it puts you in a different part of your brain, in that survival part of your brain, and that's not a good place to be. So I'm going to stop there and go on to this next one, but I just want to set the stage and point out really what these numbers set us up for, and to focus a bit differently on some of these other numbers that are actually good to know.